The cenotes of Tulum, Mexico are as legendary as they are beautiful in cave diving. A cenote is a sinkhole in limestone rock with water at the bottom that has been chiseled for thousands of years, creating a beautiful cave system. They stretch for over 220 miles, with more caverns below the surface that have yet to be explored 100 years after the first discovery. Divers travel from all around the world to get a glimpse of the underwater beauty, but not all divers return home. The allure is undeniable, but there are risks of entering into the water, risks that sometimes lead to paying the ultimate price. Unbeknownst to the pair that entered the cenote that day, their lives would change forever. This is their story. Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel where we cover all tragic and terror stories. So if you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, plus ring the notification bell to be notified of all new uploads. Now, let's get into today's story. Cave diving is a recreational activity that few in the world dare to take on. But to the 1% that do, they stomach the risk to see and explore parts of the earth that very few have, and in some circumstances, nobody before them has. While unimaginable to those of us with our feet secured directly to the ground, those few that choose to dive into the inner depths of the earth with nothing but their gear and a few flashlights find it serene and peaceful, as if all the worries in the world fall away around you for those few hours. Although anyone can purchase the equipment and find a cave to dive into, there are strict guidelines that are recommended and in most places required to ensure that certain rules are followed anytime that you enter the water. This cave diving course is always recommended as licensed cave divers are properly trained to achieve this sense of peace and still return to their loved ones. While cave diving, one breathes a mixture of gas through a canister called trimix so they can continue their adventure in relative safety. The mixture of helium, nitrogen, and oxygen is adjusted for how deep the planned dive is. The deeper the dive, the more helium would be needed to slowly replace the nitrogen. A complicated mixture of gas, but necessary to understand for those intending to dive into the depths of a cave. One of the most known risks of cave diving is developing decompression sickness, which is caused by the bubbles of gas, primarily nitrogen, that occurs in your body with a sudden change of pressure. This can literally make the gas bubble inside your joints, leaving you disoriented and unsure of yourself as if you had a great night out on the town with your friends. While a similar effect to being inebriated, nitrogen narcosis or being narked is a dangerous consequence that in most cases leads to death as the diver loses their mind in the inner depths of a cave. Along with being narked, there are significant other risks, such as equipment failure, running out of gas, simply becoming lost, and the deadliest of them all, yourself. Panicking under the water is the most sure way to lead to sloppy mistakes. Mistakes that can and will end with you paying the ultimate price. These are the risks of entering in some of the most rare places on Earth. The allure of swimming through an area that has fewer eyes than the surface of the moon is too tantalizing for the very few brave enough to gear up. On November 26, 2016, Alessandro Moreno and Amy Arriaga entered into the Grand Cenote with the intent to have a calm and beautiful dive into one of the most amazing underground caves on the planet. Amy had just passed her cave diving certification course, led by Alessandro, 2 days prior, and was ready to take on the famous cenotes of Tulum. While Alessandro was a certified instructor, he was not entirely the most experienced diver, as he had recently obtained his instructor's license, but nonetheless had dove the caves before and knew his way around. Not only divers, but tourists come by the thousands every year to lay their eyes and swim through the crystal clear water, many not straying from a few feet below the surface, but those brave enough could enter into one of the largest underwater cave systems in the world, stretching for over 220 known miles. There are cenotes all over the jungles of Tulum. Many have been discovered by accident as they were all on private land. This is a great attraction for tourists, and a great source of revenue for the locals that own the land as it drives their small economy. The two divers would enter Grand Cenote using side mounts, a form of diving where they would have the tanks of gas mounted to their side instead of their backs. This allows for easier access through smaller areas of the cave. They discussed the dive plan thoroughly before entering the water that morning. They were to start in the Grand Cenote, and Amy would be leading at all times. The dive line, which is a line of rope set up through the cave system, was already established, as this was a popular route, but there were areas where they would have to perform a jump. This would mean they would have to leave the main line, and using their own rope they brought with them, continue the trip until they reconnected with a different main line. They planned to dive through two jumps connecting to Hotel Cenote and passing the entrance of a small cenote called No Name before turning around and returning to Grand Cenote. They would be reaching a maximum depth of 12 meters or 40 feet, which meant they would not have to worry about decompression since they were not going deep enough to cause nitrogen narcosis. They would also be following the rule of thirds, which meant that they would use a third of their gas on the trip through the cave, a third of the gas on the trip back, and leave a third for any emergencies. So after agreeing on the route, time, and depth, both divers, eager yet calm, geared up, and at 11:26 a.m., they put in their regulators and submerged themselves. Alessandro would install the primary line in open water after submerging. This would connect to the main line a few feet into the cavern. The main line does not run into open water, so that unknowing swimmers and snorkelers do not mess with or follow the line into the cave. They were the first team to enter that day, meaning there were no other lines in the cave already, so they easily reached the main line and placed cookies leading to the open water. A cookie is a circular piece of plastic that latches onto the line, signaling that the diver entered this part of the cave. Each cookie would have the diver's initials on it, and they would pick them up as they exit so that everyone knew where the diver had been or is if there was ever an emergency or a search for the diver. They would typically accompany a cookie with an arrow, another simple piece of plastic that points in the direction of the exit at all times. This was to prevent getting lost or swimming in the wrong direction of the line if you are unsure of your surroundings while in the water. About 25 minutes into the dive and a few minutes off of their planned time, they reached the first jump. Alessandro showed Amy the natural light bleeding into the cavern from Hotel Cenote. They checked their air supply and gauges, both perfectly calm but eager to continue. Alessandro was filming for Amy as she dove through the cavern and had taken some amazing pictures throughout the dive. After they both agreed they were fine to move on, they made the jump, laying line through the cave as they ventured off the main one, leaving cookies and arrows leading down the path they had just swam through. Minutes passed as they calmly swam through the beautiful still water, peaceful to some. Soon enough for you or I, but not long enough for divers, they reached the end point of their dive and began to turn around to start the swim back. Everything to this point was going fantastic. Amy was enjoying every moment swimming through the cave, as this was more than she had ever imagined. This was why she spent long hours getting her license. These moments made it all worth it. They soon reached the small entrance to No Name Cenote off to their right, and Alessandro tapped Amy to show her and signaled they turn off their lights for brief seconds. Pitch black, broken by the small beam of light shining through the small entrance leading to the surface of the cenote. It was as if the light from the heavens above illuminating only what was meant to be seen. Alessandro took pictures of the natural light creeping into the cave while swimming in the dark water 30 feet under the surface. They could not help but become emotional at the beauty of it all. Just one more second to soak it all in. Alessandro flipped on his light, and with the line to his left and the cenote to his right, began taking pictures of the cave. But after about 30 seconds, he turned 90 degrees and his heart dropped. It wasn't because of what he saw, it was because of what he did not see, or should I say, who he did not see. Amy was gone. Although his heart initially dropped, Alessandro remained calm as he was sure Amy had just gone on ahead as planned. He was certain that she was just right around the corner. So he slowly swam around the 90-degree wall and saw nothing but beautiful stalactites, but no Amy. Alessandro continued following the line, sure that Amy was just ahead. He was calm, yet anxious, as he knew panicking would just make everything worse. Within minutes, Alessandro had arrived at their jump line and remained there for another 2 to 3 minutes before convincing himself that Amy was just ahead. So, he removed the jump line and began reeling it in as he swam back towards the Grand Cenote's main line. This would be his first mistake, as this meant if Amy was still behind him, there was no line for her to follow. And as a diver's first time diving into this particular cave, the odds of surviving were not in her favor. Yet Alessandro was sure Amy was just around the next corner, and when she wasn't, it was the next, and so on. Once Alessandro reached the main line, he removed his cookie. Amy had not placed one, as they planned on just using Alessandro's since they would always be together. As Alessandro got closer and closer to the surface, his heart was beating faster and faster. He was sure Amy had just gone ahead of him, yet he had still not found her. After an hour of swimming back to the Grand Cenote, Alessandro finally emerged from the water and frantically asked a guide on the surface if a female diver with a blue helmet had emerged. She simply shook her head side to side. His heart fell. Under the water, in the Grand Cenote, more divers were exiting the caves. Ron and Shane were the second team that day to enter and exit the cenote, and more importantly, the team that came across a solo female diver. About 10 minutes from the exit, Ron and Shane saw Amy swimming alone, which at first they thought was odd, but did not question it as some cave divers preferred to dive alone. Shane, being the team leader, swam up towards Amy and asked if she was okay. She quickly gave the universal okay signal, and Ron and Shane thought everything was normal. She was calm, breathing slowly, and seemed sure of her surroundings. In fact, after confirming with her, they were sure that she was doing just fine, so they swam on towards the exit. They would be the last two people to see Amy alive. Alessandro soon saw two bobbing lights in the distance. It was not long since he had gotten back into the water to search for Amy, and he was hopeful as he rounded the corner, but was met with disappointment as he saw Ron and Shane coming his way. He quickly pulled out his slate, a small board that you can write messages on underwater, and asked if they had passed another diver. Shane answered with 2 words, "Yes, solo." That was all Alessandro needed, and after receiving direction from Shane and Ron, began swimming like a madman through the cave, putting himself in danger as he became sloppy. He swam all the way back to Cenote Hutol and soon emerged from the water, screaming Amy's name. There was no answer, nothing but confused swimmers. Alessandro was in a state of panic, and worse, he had been underwater for a total of 1 hour and 47 minutes, leaving him with almost no air. He was able to borrow a canister from another diver and at 2:13 p.m. submerged himself back into the cave. He swam back to the original point he lost Amy near No Name Cenote, and that is when he saw her. Amy was lying on her back, close to the line, with her cookie installed right next to her. Her regulator was no longer in her mouth. Alessandro was overtaken by sheer desperation and grabbed his spare regulator, trying to shove it into her mouth. He thought that this was nothing but a nightmare, and Amy would just open her eyes, laughing at him as if it was all just a poorly written joke, but it was not so. He took her to Cenote No Name, where he tried to perform CPR, as he could not give up. He felt as if he had failed her, and in shock, stone-faced, could do nothing but try to bring her back. Shane and Ron had also re-entered the cave after they heard what was going on. They emerged from Cenote No Name and began helping Alessandro perform CPR, but it was all in vain. Amy was gone. They realized they had no choice but to bring Amy's body back to the surface in Grand Cenote, and the 3 divers reluctantly moved her body into the water, submerged themselves, and began the 35-minute swim back. 35 minutes swimming through the most beautiful caves in the world, holding onto the body of a fellow diver. No training could ever prepare you for this. They made it back to the cenote and emerged with Amy, surrounded by police. Their jobs were done, but their lives would never be the same. Alessandro received most of the blame from the diving community after the incident, as he had removed the line and cookies that would have been Amy's guide out of the cave, yet he was back diving weeks later. She lost her life doing something that she was passionate about and seeing some of the most beautiful views on the planet. Amy may not have survived if the equipment was left behind, but she may just have.